This is what we've been talking about over these last few meetings, the necessity of registering and the necessity of voting. And this is one of the most significant steps that the Negro can take at this hour, going to the ballot box.
The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. talking about the significance of voting. Hello, I'm Cameron Turner. The epilogue to Ava DuVernay's stirring Academy Award-nominated film Selma tells us what became of the heroes and the villains of the wrenching 1965 voting rights campaign in Selma, Alabama. Sheriff Jim Clark, whose brutal bigotry set the blueprint for the vicious response of racist Alabama whites. Well, Jim Clark got voted out of office due to the large turnout of black voters. Jim Clark getting the boot proved what the civil rights soldiers knew all along, that within the vote there lies great power. The film Selma reminds us not only of the bitter sacrifices that were made to secure the right to vote, but also of the absolute necessity for us to exercise that right to vote. This is a message I feel that some of us on the left need to reconnect with. In recent years, some of us, liberals and progressives, have been far more effective at organizing protest marches than with organizing voter turnout. And while marching is still an effective means for drawing attention to certain issues and expressing our grievances, far too often we've hit the pavement without any substantive objectives. Demonstrators at the World Trade Organization meetings in Seattle clashed with police, but they didn't really organize or mobilize supporters around a set of actions that could influence policy. The Occupy movement began as an inspiring grassroots response to corporate practices that enforce income inequality. But without any unifying agenda, set of demands, or strategy beyond urban camp-ins, Occupy withered to insignificance. Recent demonstrations against police violence in the wake of the Michael Brown and Eric Garner killings have united Americans across racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic lines to make bold and beautiful statements against biased law enforcement and in declaration of the value of black men's lives. But some of these demonstrations have been perplexing to me. It's difficult for me to see the benefit of walking out onto a freeway and blocking traffic in Berkeley, California, or in Los Angeles, or for that matter, interrupting people while they're having brunch at a cafe in New York City. Some of these actions, I fear, confront the wrong individuals and do little or nothing to mobilize people around real political action or to engage power brokers in discussions around change. Now, on the other side of the political spectrum, conservatives don't really march at all. I mean, hardly ever. What conservatives do is that they transmit their ideology to their base via the media, primarily talk radio and Fox News and the like, and then they mobilize that base to participate in elections. You see, voting is still one of the most potent forms of power in this democracy. Conservatives know that, and that, I believe, is why they have been working overtime in recent years to undercut the power of the vote for the rest of us. You see, the election of President Obama in 2008 frightened the right wing because it represented a massive coming together, a uniting of Americans across every stratum, across every stripe, around a progressive, populist agenda that was focused on change. And ever since then, Republican governors and state legislators have been enacting overly strict voter identification laws which have the effect of suppressing the votes and disenfranchising those groups which traditionally vote Democrat. Young people, the poor, low-income elderly, and Latino and black folks. Now, it was in the midst of this unabashed voter suppression that the conservative majority on the U.S. Supreme Court extracted the teeth right out of the 1965 Voting Rights Act on the false grounds that it is no longer needed. And yet, while these forces of regression have been burning the midnight oil, implementing schemes to disempower us at the polls, some of us have simply given our power away by not going to the polls. Republicans swept the November 2014 midterm elections in large measure because some 2/3 of the American electorate, including many left-leaning voters, just didn't bother to go out and vote, just stayed home. That cleared the field for GOP candidates, fueled by their very passionate, very motivated base voters to just sprint right across the electoral goal line, seizing control of the Senate, expanding their majority in the House, and taking control of several governor's mansions in the process. So yes, marching can be a good thing. But if we as liberals are to affect change in this nation and advance our agenda, then marching cannot be our primary course of action. We must continue to cultivate more effective ways to influence the hearts and the minds of the general public as well as our elected officials. And we must absolutely and without fail vote consistently in large numbers in every election, local, state, and national, and not just the presidential elections. So when we march, we must do so not only out in the streets, but more importantly, we must be guided by Dr. Martin Luther King's admonition to march on ballot boxes. That's what the Selma campaign was all about. Thank you for listening. I'm Cameron Turner. That's my 2 cents.
Let us march on ballot boxes, for this is the way we are going to straighten up the South and the nation. Let us march on ballot boxes. And men will have food and material necessities for their bodies, freedom and dignity for their spirits, education and culture for their minds. Let us march on ballot boxes until men and women will no longer walk the streets in search for jobs that do not exist. Let us march on ballot boxes until brotherhood is more than a meaningless word at the end of a prayer, but the first order of business on every legislative agenda. Let us march on ballot boxes.
You got to give the people time. Give the people what they want. Well. Don't you know you got to give the people